Welcome to the Plague Hive. Today I'm joined again by a very special guest. It's none other than Ben Dodd, who just recently won the Calling in Melbourne, the first high-level event Uzuri win that we got so far. We got pretty close with Sebastian taking second place in Antwerp, but this is the first time she's actually taken down a big event. And I'm so happy that it's been you, Ben, because you've been on this deck from the beginning. You've been like the first person to actually put out a working Uzuri list that put up results that people were trying out, you know, back when Sam Dando got that like surprise top 8 and everyone was like, whoa, that's a deck that actually has to be taken seriously. And now you've actually gone and done it and took her all the way to a Calling win. Really nice, really happy that you actually got to do this. And you're here today, and thank you for that, to talk to us a little bit about the deck, about your experience at the tournament, and maybe what's in the future for Uzuri, where the deck could go with the meta changing a little bit with Lexi rotating out and that. All right, so yeah, welcome to the channel again. Happy to have you here. And why don't we just jump straight in, and you can walk us a little bit through the deck and why you decided on certain choices for the specific meta that you were targeting at the Calling.
Sounds good. I've got a little bit of a sore throat because I'm just, so tired after the weekend and everything. Immune system's struggling.
Understandable, yeah. It was a big event, so.
But, feeling good. Yeah, really glad I managed to bring it full circle,
Yep.
Yeah, this is the list. Been working on for a while. It's quite different than what it started as, but you'll see this version that it is at these days is similar to the version Tom took to US Nats.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I got a good result there. We've, discussed things about it. He changed mine. I changed his. It all bounces around. Lots of collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, equipment suite. All of this makes sense. We only have one AB. You don't have the pitch to sustain more than that.
Mm-hmm.
You can run other daggers, but I think it's a waste of a slot.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just on the 2 daggers. It's all you need.
So why did you decide to run Arcane Lantern specifically? Like, I get the whole AB1. That makes perfect sense if you're on like 11 blues. I'm not questioning that, but why specifically Lantern instead of like... you could run Nullrune Gloves, you could run Nullrune Hood, I guess, if you wanted to like be a little more prepared into maybe Kano or something where you don't really need the block from the Crown of Providence. So why go with the Lantern over any of the other potential options that you could have?
Versus Icelander, you're not going to be daggering them a lot because that pitch, if you have spare pitch on a turn, that will be put instead of where it would normally go into a dagger. It'll go into Frostbite or AB1.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need to dagger them. And sure, sometimes they're on full arcane and your armor's useless, but most of the time they're not.
Right.
And you get use out of your crown and your flick knives.
Makes sense. All right. So basically, unless you're up against Rhea Adams, you're probably going to be fine with this setup, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Okay. And yeah, like you said, rest of this is like standard. I think the other Uzuri player that also made top 8, which by the way is insane. Like, you've got 2 Uzuris making top 8 at a Calling. Like, what's going on there? I think he ran Orbiter class in addition, but otherwise I think the equipment loadout looked fairly similar to this. So
yeah.
All right. And then again, Black Techs and Snapdragons also makes sense. I've actually seen a couple lists bounce around that completely skip the Black Tech Whisperers. Like, they just go, okay, I'm running Snapdragons into so many matchups, it's just not worth having the extra sideboard slot for Black Techs to have like a slight advantage into the aggro decks, because I think that's what it really does, right? It's like Black Techs for aggro decks and then Snapdragons for basically everything else. So what's the rationale there? Like, why did you decide to still run the Black Techs and not have another sideboard slot that you could use for something else?
I think one block is significant, especially versus Lexi with the on-hits. It might be a favored matchup, but it's a favored matchup because the deck is built to beat it. If you start forgetting that, then you might lose a game. I lost to Michael Feng the round before top 8.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you still need to respect it.
Yeah, you do.
So
especially if it's Michael Feng piloting it. So
yeah, I think armor is worth it for sure.
right. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, and then the rest is just like standard stuff: Crown of Providence, Flick Knives, Tunic, Nerf Scalpel, Spider's Bite. I think if you've watched any video on this channel, we go over these at length. So I don't think we have to go super deep into these anymore by now. So let's go down here. And this is all set up, by the way. This is one list. So there's no sideboard in this at the moment. Obviously, you equip these depending on, what deck you're facing. So into like physical damage, you typically run like obviously Crown, Flick, Tunic, the 2 daggers. And then if it's an aggressive deck, you run Black Tex. If it's a defensive deck, you run Snapdragons. I think that about sums it up probably. And if it's Dromai, you just go with Snapdragons because they can be aggressive or defensive, but you kind of need the snaps into her, right?
And Black Text does not trigger on dragon hits.
Yeah.
So you have to run snappies.
I wish it did. It would be so much better if it did, but yeah, sadly we don't get any of that good stuff. So yeah, all right. Okay. Let's go over the 72 here.
Yeah. So we've got all the staples: CNC, Death Touch, Shakedown, Codex, Leave No Witnesses. No one can disagree with any of these choices.
You are also running Surgical Extraction by now. I just want to point that out real quick.
Yes. Well, you need a couple more blues.
Yeah.
So it's it makes the list.
It's a great blue.
Unfortunately, I wish I could cut it and be the hipster I am, but I can't.
And I mean, I've been talking about this in the Uzuri chat a couple of times now, because I ran like your original OG Redline list with like I think 2 or 3 cards maybe changed, and that's what got me the Road to Nationals win, which is to this date my biggest competitive success. So yay me. But I do sometimes miss Spike with Bloodrot. It's just such a fun card to use. It doesn't. I get why it's got cut, right? It's just not efficient enough to really, put in the work. But it's so great when you can line it up.
It is efficient enough. It's just so looking for Scrap and Nimble Strike are in the slot that Spike used to be in.
Right. 1 cost. Yeah.
So they're 1 cost. So they're a Tunic sync. They can be slightly clunky. Obviously, they're 2 blocks, and you need to turn both of them on with different things retrospectively. But the Go Again is just better into a meta versus Icelander versus Dromai, and it's very synergistic with Codex. So yeah.
Like it works better with Codex than the reactions do, because you can front load it instead of like having to play something and then put the reaction on that, right? But true, like actually I haven't, for some reason that hasn't really crossed my mind, but they are really remarkably similar, right? Because like
conditional
Spike,
1 for 5.
Spike with Bloodrot is a 1 for 5 effectively, right? And so are looking for a Scrap and Nimble Strike. It's really kind of the numbers wise, right? The math is the same on these cards. They just operate on like different axes, but the overall output that you get from it is kind of similar. It's kind of interesting, yeah. All right, so yeah, like you said, we've got the standard Uzuri staples, so maybe we go over a little bit of the stuff that's a little less typical, I would say, yeah.
Yeah, so then there's the stealth package with red infect, red full playset of isolate. I think anyone who starts cutting isolates is barking up the wrong tree. The isolate is the best stealth. Never cut another stealth over isolate. It doesn't matter if it's what color. It just says stealth, dominate, and that is what you want.
That's fair. I mean, yeah, I agree. Like, I think there's a world where you cut red isolate, but that list also doesn't run any other stealth cards, right? We're talking about like a heavy contract list, Archon style, where you run 6 isolates and that's it. And in that list, I think it's fine to cut red isolate. But if you're running stealth builds, I think red isolate kind of has to be in there. Yeah, I agree with that.
And then we've got our Go Again cards. So we've got some Ravenous Rabble. Obviously,
Right.
I'm on a very high red count, even though it's crept up there now. We're on 10, 11, depending on how I'm feeling on the day.
Mm-hmm.
But Rabble is still very good.
Right.
E-Strike, just that flexibility you need in Uzuri to be able to play offense or defense.
Yep. 3 block.
And then Nimblism, which is my favorite card in the deck, for sure. Very inconspicuous card.
Yeah.
Just a little buff. But this card does so much work for the deck. It turns on Nibble Strike, which is very beneficial. It buffs up your Leave No Witnesses and means that it's not an easy block. You know, Nimblism into Codex for a DT. That's one of your best turns.
Yep.
Allows you to really push the damage. This card is just very synergistic and really helps smooth the deck out.
Yeah, I still remember when you posted like the original Redline list, right? And then people were like, why is Nimblism in this? It doesn't work with Uzuri, right? Like if you swap it, the buff gets lost, and then that kind of got people like, okay, what do you do with this card? Like, why is this in there? But just the amounts of things you can do with this, I mean, it's basically like another copy of Hurl, right? Just that it again operates on a different axis and it makes your on hits nastier. So it's kind of like, in a sense, actually better than a Hurl, right?
It fills a very different role to Hurl, because Hurl is a sideboard card for Dromai, and decks where you need to be playing the aggressive position, like when you're playing into Bravo or into Icelander. Nimblism's always in the deck. It's kind of a core piece of what you want to be doing. It's also the last buff, so it is the only card that still allows you to, you know, buff up a red Isolate and shred it and get that Dominate through.
Yep.
Which is, you know, useful. You can pitch stack that in slower matchups, do all kinds of things.
It's a good late game option, right? Like the old build your own Macho Grande, just that it got a little bit harder to build now because you run less of the pumps. But yeah, the basic idea is still there, and it still works just as well as it did back in the old him days, where that was like one of your typical finisher options against really grindy decks. Yeah.
Exactly. Then we're on the 8 copies of Shred, Rainbow Shred.
Right.
I think, you know, I've proven by now Shred is good in Uzuri. And if you think Shred is bad, either you're siding it in the wrong positions, or you're arsenaling it when you should have been blocking it.
I think learning when to keep a shred and when to not keep a shred is probably one of the key skills you need to learn when you want to play Uzuri. I have like a love-hate relationship with the card, to be honest. I understand it's really good in what it does, but it can just be really clunky if you do the wrong thing with it, basically. And recognizing those situations where you're about to do the wrong thing with it takes a little bit of time to actually get that fully, you know, into your brain and internalize that, basically.
It's a card that can lose you a whole game, which makes people think it's bad. But that card won me several of my games.
Yeah.
It gets the damage to reverse Iceland. It gets the damage to reverse Dromai. This card got the damage through for me versus Michael Feng in top 8. It's flexible. You can block with it. You can pitch with it. You can get through the D-reacts. We love this card. For instance, in the top 8, the finals match, I drew it off Codex Ponder.
Yeah, I saw that.
And I have to skip my arsenal for the turn, right? And that is the kind of thing that makes people not want to run it.
Yeah.
But it's worth sometimes drawing a shred you don't want off Codex.
Yeah.
To have the power in the deck.
Yeah, I get that. I think if you wanted to like run other codices, right? Like if you're also on Codex of Bloodrot, for example, which I've seen in some lists, and it's a fine card. I'm not hating that card. But I think like if you start putting more codices in, or like generally more sources of ponder, you probably have to cut back on the shreds a little, just because it depends on a matchup, right? There's matchups where you're like, yeah, it's fine arsenaling a shred. I don't hate this. But that's typically in a position where you're ahead or you're playing against a defensive deck anyways, right? And then I still remember that moment in the finals game when you like drew the shred off the ponder and you just look at your hand and then you just draw back up to 4 without arsenaling. And I think every Uzuri player just knew exactly what card you had just drawn. Just because that's like basically the only card in a deck that really doesn't want to go into Arsenal in some situations.
Yeah. We'll move on to some of the other tools here.
Yep.
We'll go with the defensive stuff.
Sure.
So 3 sink below. Nothing to say there.
Yep.
It's sink below. We love this card. 3 Frailty Trap. Lexi is the best deck.
Yep.
Frailty Trap is the single strongest card in the game versus Lexi, in my opinion. You're not going to be able to present that perfect disruption every turn. You're not going to be able to give them that frailty every turn.
Yep.
So when you draw a hand that is just raw damage, maybe block, rabble for 4 into an E-strike for 7. That's their window. So they're going to get a turn where they get to like tank some damage and then keep that power hand. And if they've drawn the gas on that hand, basically Frailty Trap is a punish card. It's a disruption card that you can draw on the turn that they have the gas.
Yep.
You get like 2 chances to hit disruption with this, either while you're playing or when you're blocking.
Yeah.
Makes it much more consistent and gives you a lot more control in the game, especially because you can arsenal it.
Yeah, like, I mean, Frailty Trap, against like a Lexi power turn is like a 0 for 6, 0 for 7 sometimes even, right?
It's often more because it allows you to block their on hits incredibly efficiently.
That's true.
So when they play out their turn and you Frailty Trap them, suddenly all of their 4 arrows, you just give them a 3 block each, and then they'll come in with their 5 arrow. You can easily just give it a 3 block, and that black text or that flick knives you've still got.
True.
And suddenly the blood rod on hit, the endless arrow return to hand, it all just goes away.
Yep. So to kind of fast forward a little bit here, just because I think it fits the discussion about Frailty Trap pretty nicely. Like, I could see this being a card that stays in the deck, or at least in the sideboard in like a post-Lexi world, right? Just because it's so good against Mechanologists specifically. I think both flavors of Dash, right? Because against Dash.io, obviously, it's great because if they do like a high octane turn and they're looking to pistol you like 4 or 5 times, again, this card is just like a 0 for 7, 0 for 8, whatever. It doesn't really help with any on hits the way it does into Lexi, but it still preserves a whole ton of life, right? And you can get them into a spot where they just don't attack with the gun because they're like 1 damage pings. It's not worth wasting the counters if my damage gets literally cut in half from this one card. And then against like OG Dash with the pistol build, Frailty Trap is also great. Because if they load up the pistol and they can then fire off like 3 or 4 shots with it, you have Frailty Trap ready to go and soak up a bunch of that damage and just preserve life and get another turn to try to kill them before they can outvalue you in the long game. So I could definitely see this card staying in a deck even when Lexi is out of the picture, right?
I think this card is very good versus OG Dash, for sure. I don't think this card is as good versus Dash.io as people expect.
All right.
So I've built a rough list for probably what I'd run if I was heading to Worlds in the next week, which I'm not because it's just too short notice for me.
Yeah, makes sense.
But I've cut 2 Frailty Traps. Still on 1 because it is relevant and it's not a bad card. And usually you can get 4 value with it into an aggro deck just by turning off their weapon slightly. But into Dash.io, they cannot pistol when you do this. And also on turns where they're just going to be using the pistol once, it might be worth it versus them. I think getting it to line up with their big high octane turn is inconsistent. Because you don't really want... Your arsenal needs to be cycled often.
Yeah. And
you'll be forced to play... So you can arsenal this safely because you can just block with the next turn. But then there may well be a death touch in your hand you need to put in there. Yeah. So you're going to be forced to use it. You can't hold on to it forever versus them.
Makes sense.
Like into Lexi, no matter what their turn is, this is very, very powerful. Into Dash.io, oftentimes... it can just be a 3 or a 4 block, which is not
right.
bad, but I don't know whether I would run 3 of it. I'm not saying it's bad versus them, but is it worth the slot is the question.
Right, okay, yeah, I get that. I mean, it also sort of depends on where exactly she lands in the meta, right? Like, if Dash.io ends up actually taking over, like, the top aggro spot, and that's not a given at this point, I think. So it could be that she's just so powerful that she takes over Lexi's spot, but it could also be that top aggro slot just gets taken by a ninja instead. I could see both, and I'm not
It
willing.
depends.
I'm not willing to make a bet on that, I think, at the moment. So
Yeah, I mean, Dash.io definitely has the power to be the top aggro deck. The question is, once people know it's a threat, how much worse does it get, and how much damage can people do by planning for it?
Right.
We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a Battle Hardened, right, this weekend, and I think that's gonna be like the sort of like the litmus test for Worlds, I think, right? Like, because it's the first event where Lexi is no longer legal, and it's also the first event where people are realizing that, hey, hang on, this Dash.io deck is actually pretty decent after the run that Thomas did at the Calling. So that's going to be a really interesting event. Also, I think it could kind of be a little bit of a skewed perspective, because I'm thinking that, like, the pro players, if they actually attend the event, they're not going to bring like their Worlds deck, at least not in the exact same configuration, right? You don't want to, give away all of your secret techs like 1 week before the big cheese. So,
I mean, having a serious tournament practice is pretty good, though. So maybe you just bring your exact list. Maybe, it depends what you're going for.
Maybe you just kind of psyop your opponents. Like, they expect that it's not the exact same list, then you bring your exact same list, and they're thinking, nah, he's going to bring something else, I don't know. I'm not a pro player, so I don't know what goes on in your guys' head, so shake. All right.
Yeah, we'll finish the last couple cards.
Yep.
I'll blitz through them. 2 Fate Scene. You could be on 3, but Feralty Trap is better when Lexi's the best deck.
Makes sense. And
I didn't have room for all 9.
Yep.
2 Sigil. This is flexible card. It gives you some game into Icelander. It's kind of a Oasis-like effect, preventing arcane damage through the life gain, but doesn't cost resources, which is very important for me.
Yep.
It's also solid into decks that are not presenting on hits. So, like Rhinar, I played a great game versus Rhinar in round 4, which I did not get the win, but there was a lot of fun turns in there. One turn where I took all the damage, attacked with Leave No Witnesses, and had a 3-card hand. And so they blocked for 10.
Okay.
And then I sigiled twice and Arsenal.
Okay, yeah. I think it is one of or probably actually the best bluff card for Uzuri, right? Like, if you bluff a shred or you bluff a swap, if you play like an infect or something, and they're like, okay, he's keeping a card, he could have like a CNC or something, and then they block 6, and you just go, okay, I'll arsenal this card, and it's a sigil. That's just a massive win, right? That's like one of the best plays you can make in that spot. And if they don't call the bluff, right? Okay, sure. Or actually, if they call the bluff, right? They don't block. They still take 5 from the infect. You gain 3, so it's like still pretty solid, right? It's an outcome you can work with, I would say, in that position. So yeah, great card. I like it. It's probably something that you side out into some matchups, like the more aggressive ones, where you just go, okay, I need the blocks here, can't afford to run this card. But against like slower decks, or the decks like Bravo, like Azalea, like Rhinar, where you get to keep larger hands anyways, just due to how their deck operates, and this is a great card,
So you side this out when you care about the on hits, and you leave it in when you versing Arcane.
Right.
They're making your blocks more difficult, and very flexible. Then the last card that is kind of questionable is the Nourishing Emptiness. So this is a flexible slot because this is this is not in the main deck, and you need a popper for Dromo. and you want an extra threat in some matchups.
Mm-hmm.
So, some people like Humble, but I think this really wants to be a 3-block.
Right.
So then you've got a couple options, which is Amnesia, Nourishing Emptiness, and Already Dead.
Yep.
I'm playing Nourishing for the turn 0 high roll into aggro when they win the die roll and ask you to start.
Right.
You get to run this. It's a 3-block, and you run it instead of into aggro. You usually have to run some number of yellow shred.
Okay.
But I'm playing Nourishing Emptiness instead as a card that I'm happy to put into Arsenal after a ponder.
Okay, right.
And if I'm playing first and I draw opening to earn, that's hugely impactful.
You just get the high roll, yeah.
And if I'm playing second versus an aggro deck and they just Arsenal pass, which is often, then the same thing can occur.
Yeah, like if it's not, a ninja deck with Kodachis, where if they go first, they typically just go, okay, Kodachi, because if you actually block the Kodachis, it's kind of inefficient because then they can actually use the rest of their turn to push actual damage into you. If you let the Kodachis through, obviously you start down like 1 or 2 health, so that's not great. But yeah, I can see that. That makes sense, yeah. So you just run it when you are kind of forced to go first against like aggressive decks where you go, okay, I need to block with at least 1 or 2 cards every turn anyways, and then this is just as good as any other 3-block in a deck, basically. And the offensive value is sort of irrelevant. Plus, it gives me the chance of the high roll, essentially. So
exactly. It also it improves your matchup versus the decks who you have to play first into because they like playing first.
Right.
Because Uzuri doesn't want to start that much. It's hard to punish that hard because none of your on hits affect the next turn very well.
Yeah.
So even if you isolate a shakedown on the first turn, it's just 3 damage and they draw back up.
It kind of doesn't do anything. Yeah. The only card you have that's like really good to see on turn 0 with an isolate is a Death Touch. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. So into Bravo, into Icelander, into Dromite, all of these decks like to start versus you. You get to pick start. And then Nourishing is another card that will strip some armor, just get you a little ahead at the start of the game.
Okay, yeah. No, that makes sense, yeah. So have you actually like tested the other 2 options in that slot, like extensively? And then just after a while just decided, right, this is like the best thing I can run in this spot. Amnesia doesn't do enough because Katsu's not relevant enough, I suppose. And then Already Dead. I can see that Already Dead in this particular deck doesn't really do a ton, to be honest. I think it gets a lot better in like contract heavy decks, specifically in Arachne, just because once you get past a certain threshold of contract cards, you can start running Cut to the Chase. And then Already Dead as a target for Cut to the Chase is pretty crazy. But if you don't have that, I can see it not really coming up basically ever. Like you're never generating silver from this card, or like basically almost never. And then the circumstances where you can actually get the effect to pop off usually require your opponent to misplay in a way. So I can see it being a card that you wouldn't want to run in like a specifically stealth-based red heavy version of Uzuri, yeah. Which kind of pains me to say because obviously I love the card, but it is what it is, yeah. Okay.
And even when you do get that effect off, it will, you get to destroy the temper armor or the battle worn armor and take another armor block away, and the armor's effect. That is usually, maybe like, it depends how some of the armors are impactful, for instance, Tectonic.
Yeah.
But oftentimes you'll just get like 1 armor value out of it.
True,
and you have to do a lot of work to get that, which Nourishing Emptiness can just win you a whole game.
Yeah.
So I much prefer this.
Makes sense, yeah. Yeah, like the problem with Already Dead is nobody's, like, sure, you can send like a rabble, and then if they block that with armor, you can follow it up with like isolate Already Dead and then kill the armor. But realistically, nobody's blocking a rabble with armor. That's kind of the issue there, right? So you need to find a way to have like a go again card that has an actual threatening on it. So you need to do something like leave no witnesses with like snaps, and then follow that up with the already dead. It's just kind of a little bit too rough to actually get that to execute. Yeah. All right. Yeah, let's go through the rest of the deck real quick. I think there's not really much left. Hurl, I think we don't really need to talk about. Down and
Over
dirty.
there, Dromo.
Draw my sidebar card. That's it. Looking for a scrap and nimble strike. I understand the ratios here because you don't run enough blues to run looking for a scrap in a larger capacity. One question I would have is like with nimble strike, you kind of have like that 1-3 ratio, right? And with looking for a scrap in this iteration, you actually have a 1-6 ratio. Like you didn't want to include two of them.
The nimbleisms, every time you see them, they will go to the graveyard.
Right, okay.
Because it's either blocked or played.
Right.
Well, now occasionally you'll pitch it or sink it to the bottom, but usually if it's the first one, you'll decide not to do that, to turn it on.
Right, okay.
Unless it's worth it, in which case it's worth it, so it's fine.
Yeah, makes sense.
With the blue stealths, when you swap in, it goes away.
Right.
When you pitch it, it goes away.
Yeah,
so
okay.
It's only when you block with it, and that is just, it means the ratio has to be larger to account for that.
Makes sense, right? Because you have to sort of like make the conscious decision to block with like the first blue stealth that you see. And sure, you can turn it on with a dagger if you need to, but yeah, okay. Yep. Like that, it makes sense because like effectively you run less blue stealths that actually end up in the graveyard than you run nimblisms that actually end up in the graveyard. So when you see it like that, yeah, it makes absolute sense. Okay, and then I think the last thing we have is a single copy of Spreading Plague.
Yeah. This is another card that punishes overblocking.
Okay.
So there's 2 Sigil and 1 Spreading Plague. Both are things you can do when your opponent plays around Shred, basically.
Okay.
You don't want a ton of these, but I really like having some, especially in top 8 when they see your deck list.
Right, yeah, because then they need to be kind of afraid of it, right? It's like the psychological effect sort of when you run like a single copy of Pummel and they haven't seen it yet, and they're like, okay, could that be the Pummel? Except this card just is less punishing than Pummel, right? Because it's like, it's a 3-block, it's a yellow. You can unclunk it from Arsenal if you really have to for no effect. And I think I've actually seen you do that on stream once.
Yes.
It came up in one game.
Yeah. I was versus Icelander. Spreading Plague, very good versus Icelander. But I drew a double Death Touch hand with no other attacks.
Right.
So I could not present any damage. So I just attacked with a dagger, hoping for somehow they block it. They did not. Spreading Plague for no value, and then I get to Arsenal the Death Touch and set up a better turn.
Makes sense, yeah.
Managed to turn my 5-card hand into 1 damage. But
you got there.
You just gotta accept it and move on.
It happens. Like that's the deck does brick sometimes a little bit. Okay.
That is the worst deck I've ever had.
That hurt to watch. I'm gonna be honest with you. Like when I saw that play, I was like, oof, that's nasty. But I mean, you managed to win that game in the end, so it kind of worked out despite that brick. So it's not everything's lost when you brick once. Typically, when you brick twice in a row, it starts to get pretty dicey. But once is typically fine. All right, and so that takes care of the deck. We went over everything. Like I said, this will be linked down in the description. So if you want to give it a spin, boot it up on Teletra, try it out. And like I said, hopefully the way we talked about the cards gives you a little bit of an idea of how to sideboard into different decks and different matchups. And with that, maybe we can go over your actual tournament run for a little bit. I've put up the Swiss rounds that you had on the screen and the top 8. Anyone can go and watch that, and I'll link the stream that was posted in the description of the video. So anyone who wants to see Ben in action win against a couple of decks can do that. It's well worth watching. Like if you want to see how Uzuri operates on like a high tournament level. Definitely check out his matches. All of them were really, really good matchups. Tense games. I think the Lexi on stream was a little bit, that's how a Lexi game is supposed to go. So you rolled them pretty hard, but that's why you play Uzuri, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons. Like, she was unfortunately the best deck into the best deck in the format, and now that Lexi's gone, we're gonna have to reorient a little bit. But we're gonna go over that a little bit later. So take us through your day, or your days, I could say, at the Calling.
Yeah. So I felt going in that Dromai was not going to do well, because in so many of these larger tournaments, it has struggled to convert well, aside from Calling Dallas,
right,
where it did incredibly well. But so that got me a bit nervous. But I was like, I'm not going to trust the one data point over the several others.
Okay.
And so, I think Uzuri is a good pick, even though Dromai is considered to be one of the best decks. That's helped by the fact that I'm confident that versus a Dromai pilot who doesn't know the matchup, I can still come out ahead.
Yep.
So I'm only, I'm hoping if I'm versing a Dromai in day one, I can get there on knowledge diff.
Right.
And in day two and the top 8, hopefully they're all weeded out and I'm versing Lexis.
Okay, makes sense. I mean, if we're looking at the actual results, it kind of turned out the exact opposite of that. You had to face a Dromai in top 8, but that actually worked out and you managed to beat them. But I've also found that Dromai's disrespecting the matchup and just going, yeah, it's Uzuri, we're like hugely favored into her, I don't need to really learn this, are definitely doing that at their own peril, right? Because if they're facing an Uzuri pilot that has put in the reps and that has put in the tech for Dromai specifically, stuff like Down and Dirty, which you can just arsenal and then, just sit on it in arsenal and let till you really need it. And again, that did come up in the, quarterfinals, I think, that you played against the Dromai, right? We saw you sitting on that Down and Dirty for 5 or 6 turns. It was pretty crazy. And then you used it to pop at Dominia when they did, in fact, banish the only popper you had in hand. So that was a really heads-up play from you there in that position. And I think if you're up against a Dromai, like you said, that doesn't have a ton of experience with the matchup and that maybe goes in expecting to win because they just kind of disrespect it a little bit, they might be in for a hard time. It's still not favored for Uzuri, definitely, but it does make it a little bit easier to actually get the win in those situations.
Yeah. And Kwanli has played versus Uzuri. He does actually know the matchup, but I think he's used to less aggressive assassins.
Right, yeah.
Because he sided in Remembrance versus me.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So either he was hedging, because maybe he feels favored even if I'm aggressive and he hedges for if it's a fatigue game, which that may well be the correct call because, when that's what I do on Uzuri when I'm playing into a favored matchup is hedge for the worst case.
Yeah, sure. Makes sense.
But that helped me out for sure because he was playing for a longer game while I was playing for the shorter game.
Yeah. You tried to kill him before those remembrances had a chance to actually be relevant. And I mean, you did get a little bit lucky in the fact that he didn't see any rakes for I think the first half of the game at least. Like his first rake came when he was halfway through his deck. So that definitely helps because the Ash Wings, especially with the way you were aggressively flicking your daggers away, which is that turned a couple of heads, I think. I remember a couple of people specifically in Dromai chat going oh no, he's flicked the second dagger, he's definitely gonna lose now. And then in the end, actually those extra 4 damage that you managed to push through with that flick, or technically I think 6 damage, right? Because it was a blood rot, I think, that you landed there. I don't remember exactly. But
I got 10 damage off of flick knives that game across the match, which is I mean,
It's insane.
if you say Dromai starts on 30 health, the matchup starts to look a lot better.
Yeah, definitely. Like flicking into sand cover is definitely can be very impactful, but I do agree that you have to really know what you're doing when you make that play, because losing the dagger can also be completely devastating, right? It really depends on how exactly the matchup is looking. But I think in that case, you identified correctly that they didn't see any rakes yet, and you kind of need to finish the game before they do. And then flicking the dagger to just, push the damage when you get the chance to do so makes perfect sense. So, yeah, heads up play there again. Definitely makes sense.
So, yeah, that was, a little, side note on how I felt going in, and then some of the way it played out going into top 8. But we'll take it back. First round, sat down versus a kind of a classic hybrid dash list, similar to Merrick Kemp's top 8.
Right, yeah.
I believe. And they got the items out very quickly. They were on a full 5 items, kind of maybe 6, 7 turns in.
Okay. That is definitely fast, yeah.
But they took a lot of damage in doing so. I was presenting, I had drawn my go again threats, which you side all of them in for that matchup. So they were on like 20 health, roughly. Obviously, I can't remember all the details.
Sure, yeah.
But then they've got the big items, but I've got a lot of shreds in my list and a lot of isolate swaps left. And I managed to, chip through and get through their reacts, their reinforced lines, and get them dead before the pistol items can kind of come to fruition.
Yeah. I think like in that matchup, one thing that can actually be like slightly beneficial for you is if they get the items out really quick. A lot of the times they don't really have a ton of blues to actually make use of it, right? Like, because what you really want in that situation as a dash is to get all of the items out and then basically draw only blues for the rest of the game. That's like your ideal situation. And first cycle, your deck is full of reds, right? Like you've got all of these red defense reactions, you got all the sinks, the fates, all of that stuff. And then you can definitely draw a couple of hands where you just don't have the resources to actually really utilize the pistol. And that can buy you a couple of extra turns as the Uzuri to try to find the damage to actually kill them.
100%. And because it's a hybrid list, it's playing boost cards, so it can go to either game plan, which means it's running a couple less blows and a couple less D-reacts than a kind of full control deck, which would give me more trouble. So yeah, won that, feeling good with a round 1 win. Next game, I get matched into a Lexi. This Lexi played well and then drew a Rainraiser 3 of a kind turn.
All right.
Which is about the highest damage you can really deal with. Luckily, I had attacked and got a death touch through on the last turn, choosing Frailty.
Right, nice.
And I drew a Frailty trap.
Okay.
So I got to have a double Frailty turn on their strongest turn of the game.
Okay.
Which meant it was down, instead of double Rainraiser, I basically,
single Rainraiser,
killed one of them. Single Rainraiser turn, which meant I managed to stay alive with just enough health to close out the game.
Okay, nice.
That was very, very close, though, for sure.
Yeah, you can absolutely lose to Lexi as Uzuri. Like, it's definitely a favorite matchup, but if they draw the nuts, sometimes you just lose because they present so much damage, you have no way of actually disrupting it in time to stay alive. It just happens sometimes.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that I stay teched and respect the matchup, because, if I didn't draw Frailty Trap, I would have lost that game there.
Yeah, makes sense.
But, I think being able to say you beat a Lexi who drew the most best hand they can.
Yeah.
Not many decks can say that.
That's true. Definitely, yeah.
Round 3, I played versus Uzuri. Both of us were very happy to, dodge some Dromais and just have a fun move.
Fair.
Just classic back and forward, blocking, D-react, attack, react, who can outvalue, who can get those on hits through. I came out on top. So very happy with a 3-0 start.
Nice. Was it also a variant of Redline or like a different archetype?
It was more on the blue side, running some contracts. It was
Okay.
kind of a hybrid contract. It wasn't a full contract list,
Right. Okay.
but
So
had a
like,
couple. Kind of similar to what we saw at Taipei.
Yep.
Then going into round 4, I'm versus a runner. There's a Phi mirror match next to me, and then a Phi on the other side of me. And I'm like, oh, damn, wish I got to versus one of those guys.
Fair.
Yeah, had a great game versus this runner player. He played very well. I misplayed on very early in the game. I didn't join the dots. I didn't see the tunic up in time.
Okay.
And I did not play correctly into an incoming pummel, which I could have thought about and had a much better turn.
Right.
So I lost quite a lot of value on that turn cycle due to, I'd say it's probably, lack of reps. I've played versus runner a bit, but not one of those decks where I know every threat immediately and intrinsically.
Yeah,
I've played
makes
runner,
sense.
so I know the deck. I know they are on pummel, but I just didn't.
No, I get it. Like Rhinar, I think is not the deck that you typically go like, okay, this is a deck that I need to put a ton of reps into because I'm gonna face a lot of it at any given event, right? I mean, I don't want to disrespect Rhinar. Like, I'm a brute player, right? But fact of the matter is he's not played a ton typically. But that usually means that the few that you actually face are typically very well versed on the hero, right? Like, if you bring Rhinar to an event, that typically means you know what you're doing with the hero. So they're usually good Rhinar pilots. That's how it just turns out. Otherwise, you don't bring Rhinar if you're not really like a committed Rhinar player, basically.
For sure. And he played well. So after that happened, I was like, I had to take a moment and, reassess the mental state. Okay.
Yeah.
We've punted now, but we can still win this game.
Yep.
Let's play our best. It was a great game. As I said, there was a fun sigil play in there where I tanked on block for ages. I pretended like I wanted to block and then decided not to.
Right.
And then he's sitting there tanking on his blocks like, oh, what does he have? Is it a spreading? Is it a shred? Like,
right, yeah.
He's considering blocking with it, and then he decides to respect it, and I get to punish him with the gain 6 life, reset the turn, steal that tempo back.
Yeah, yeah.
We play out from there. I get to force a block with the first blood rush he draws.
Okay, nice. Always good.
And his other blood rushes are late, but he's playing a very good value game versus me with D-Reacts. In the end, we get down to like a 1 health state. I'm on 3. I'm threatening lethal. I'm fatigued at this point. Okay. I've only got 1 turn left.
Yeah.
I get the Nimbalism isolate stack to finish and present lethal. No armor left. And he's used basically all the reacts. He has to have the Reckless swing in hand.
Okay, right.
He has the Reckless, but he also has a Beast Within. And so if I hit the Beast Within, he dies.
Oh, God.
And
okay, yeah.
The discard goes his way, and then he gets to finish me the next turn.
Right, okay.
But yeah, that was a lovely game.
That sounds like a really, really close game. Yeah. That definitely interesting game, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, like again, Rhinar I think is probably one of the decks that can be favored into Uzuri just because we want to block typically, and Rhinar loves decks that want to block because he can mess with them. So
exactly.
Yep.
So then I'm matching down for round 5 after 3-1 start, feeling all right still, but I really wanted to be in that 4-0 bracket because all of the aggro decks are in there at the moment.
Makes sense. Yeah.
There's a lot of Dromai with 1 loss. And there's a lot of, there's Phis, there's the Dash IO, there's Lexis, there's a lot of aggro decks in the undefeated bracket, and I was really hoping to stay riding that.
Yeah.
I sit down, we flip heroes, it's Icelander. I'm very upset that I punted my last game and didn't play around pummel. and now I'm in the control deck bracket,
Uh-huh.
So this is probably, my worst matchup on the day aside from Kano.
Okay.
They win the die roll. They're starting. We play a game. There's plenty of details, but in the end, I get there.
Yep.
It's a full Arcane Icelander,
Okay, right.
but I managed to get a good shakedown, force a Eisenhower Weathervane into their arsenal,
Okay.
and then that's bricked for a number of turns.
Right.
And then in the end, Shred finishes off.
Was it a red Eisenhower or
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay, and then they can't play it out on your turn, and on their turn they need something they can fuse with, or it's kind of wasted. Makes sense.
Yeah. And,
okay.
And they need the resources to play it, something to fuse with, something to fuse.
Yeah.
And
So
on the turns where they have that, I'm presenting damage that they can't ignore.
So they need to keep like a large hand, and then okay, makes sense. So if you can kind of like brick their arsenal up, so they can't disrupt you on your turn, the matchup gets a lot easier. Yeah, that makes sense.
They ended up playing it out for no value, which I believe was the correct play to unbrick the arsenal. But that's still a major win for me.
Yeah.
And we managed to get there.
Yeah, I think at some point you have to do that in that position. It's similar to like the where you play out the spreading for no value, right? Like sometimes it's just what you gotta do. You just need that arsenal to do something, and there's no way around it. You just have to bite the bullet. Yeah.
Then I'm playing into a Lexi. I'm very happy. I somehow managed to beat Arcane Icelander.
Yeah.
And I'm back versus an aggro deck. Okay, we're in it. We're still going strong. Yep, Lexi, favored matchup for me. Goes pretty much the way you'd expect.
Yep.
Last round of day one, I'm into a Bravo. And I'm very happy. I've played this matchup a lot, and I feel very confident into it. It's just about that value game. We're playing D-Reacts. They do manage to get me with they come in with a dominated Starstruck, and I block it out to give myself the ability to play a 6-power card from my hand on my turn, just pitch for a shakedown.
Right.
Using my armor to allow this.
Okay.
And they lunging press me and put it over to 7.
Okay, yeah.
Which means I then have to pass back.
Yep.
So they're ahead at the start of the game, but I managed to grind it out. And in the end, same old story. Finish off with a shred.
Yep. That's how it goes. Yeah, lunging press, I think, is a card that you can't really play around lunging press. First up, you don't really expect to see it, right? In a lot of lists, and then you're not gonna play around +1 damage, right? It's not efficient to do that in a lot of cases. So it's same as you can't really play around pummel. If Bravo has a pummel, he has a pummel, right? Like you can't really do anything about that. It's just how it goes sometimes.
Yeah.
All right, so that's day one taken care of.
That's day one finished with a 6-1 record. Very happy.
That is very solid, definitely. Yeah.
Day 2, feeling good. 5 rounds, and I just need to win 3 out of the first 4 rounds, and I should be good.
Yep.
Round 1, I'm versus another Icelander, and we go to the stream table.
Yep.
Not feeling good, but just definitely. I think one of the things that people don't talk about enough is the mental game, and not deciding that you've lost when you get a bad matchup, and not deciding you've won when you get a good matchup. I made mistakes that cost me games in this tournament, but I kept playing with the same mindset afterwards. And that's something I was working on in the weeks leading up to this, because I know all the matchups very well. I have a lot of reps, but I was really focused on how am I going to be approaching the tournament.
Yeah.
From my personal side of it. I think that was one of my big successes.
Yeah.
On the weekend was win or loss, good play or bad play, I was staying in the zone.
Yeah. Right. No, I think, like you said, this is actually something that's a little bit overlooked, I think. And this ability to just, stay cool and just keep playing the game no matter what happens in the game, and just kind of stay in the same focused space and not, get worked up too much over mistakes, is definitely something that separates, like, I think, really good players from good players, right? Because, like, anyone can know how to, like, maybe not anyone, but you can definitely know how to play your deck with reps. You put the reps in, your lines, how the deck operates. But if you start tilting because sometimes variance happens and you get run over, or you just face a string of bad matchups for you, it can be hard to stay in that, like, calm and chill zone and just keep playing to your best. And that's definitely something that's very important to do that. I think this, and then, like, hydration and nutrition is probably, like, the most important and most overlooked tournament aspects, I would say. Like, take enough water with you, take enough food with you, so you can, refuel during the, like, between rounds and stuff, because those tournaments drag on for a long time and you're gonna need the energy.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, that's just a little aside on something I think is, like, the most important, or one of the most important things.
No, I totally agree.
And so yeah, I sat down versus Icelander. We're at this, you can see this match. This is the match that I hit some very good shakedowns, but I followed them up with a 1 damage turn. And at that point, I was like, oh, it's over. I thought I was winning, but there's no way I win after this. But I managed to put that aside, focus on the game, and we got there.
Yep. And like you said, this is a match that's on stream, so you can, watch that. Like I said, I'll link it down in the description. You can check that out. If you're struggling with Icelander, definitely check that video out. It's a really good teaching experience, just getting to know what Uzuri can actually do against Icelander. And it does not involve AB3 and a ton of blues. That's not necessarily how you win that matchup. So
then next round, versus Lexi, I'm very happy. I sat down versus Brody, and I was worried that he might have, because I know he likes Azalea, and Azalea just won a large event.
Yep.
And I'm like, this is going to be a very tough matchup if I'm facing his Azalea. But he's on Lexi, sweet as.
Nice.
Not much to say there. Priority trap, some CNCs to destroy double arsenal. It goes very well, and we get there.
Yeah, like we said, that's the reason you bring Uzuri, right? Like, you want to target the Lexis. That's or at least what you used to do, right? No longer possible, but yeah.
Then I'm versus Dash.io. This is versus Thomas, and he's still undefeated, and I'm feeling pretty good because I think, I'm built to beat aggro decks. Surely we can get there. He can't block well. I'm like 25 health up.
Yeah.
I'm at like 37 to his like 18 or something. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it kind of plays out the same way the final did, where he's setting up and he hasn't found any of these good turns yet, and I'm pressuring. I've got the disruption, and he just plays a couple boost cards, but it's not really getting there versus me. But as you saw, that deck's very scary.
Yeah.
And I got him to 9 health, and then he plays like a 25, 30 damage turn. And then suddenly my turn just presents vanilla damage after that.
Yeah.
Which I can't present 9.
Yeah.
So I block out instead, because getting him to 3 doesn't stop his next turn from killing me. And then he has just keeps the pressure and whittles me down and takes the win. Then I need to win the next game after that.
Okay.
I was really hoping.
That was a win and in basically at that point, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because if your last 2 are losses, then you'll be very high on the breakers.
Yeah, makes sense.
And I get paired versus another Lexi human who is in top 8. And, well, you saw that game on stream.
Yep, and that went...
The classic Lexi game.
Yeah, that went about as well as a Lexi game can go, I think, for you, definitely, yeah. That's how what you want to see when you're versing Alexi is that kind of game, right? Like where you just kind of stop her from ever stringing together like a really big turn and just keep up a constant stream of disruption that eventually you just can't handle anymore. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how it goes.
And then me and Michael Feng sit down from one another, and both of us are locked at this point.
Right.
And so we're chatting, having fun, feeling good, both making top 8. Really nice vibes. We get deck checked.
Mm-hmm.
He only wrote down 79 cards on his deck list.
Okay.
Not 80. I missed one in the rush before submit.
Oh, okay, right.
So he receives an IP2 penalty.
Okay.
Lucky that it's on this round after we're both locked.
Yeah.
So, both of us are happy that it's not going to affect either of our top 8.
Yeah, makes sense.
I'm feeling supremely confident versing Alexi on an IP2.
Yep.
And he manages to beat me, which really just Michael Feng really feels just on another level for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely the best player I've ever faced.
Mm-hmm.
The way he blocks and just plays out his hands, it almost felt like I was. I didn't draw badly that game. For the record, I was doing my normal Uzuri things.
Yeah.
And somehow he was maintaining parity, maintaining his life total. He basically out mid-ranged me rather than going for any of the larger turns.
Okay, right.
So he ended up fatiguing me.
Okay.
We're both on like 1 or 2 life, and I've only got a couple cards in deck to his like 10.
Okay.
And I have like 1 good turn left, but can't quite line it up to get the lethal.
Right.
And he finishes me off.
Crazy. Like, was he actually running over 60 to begin with?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
He was on like 70.
Okay, and then probably also on Trench, I would assume, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, right. Yeah, that makes sense. So he kind of preserves cards in deck a lot, and then, him running 70 makes sense that he would be able to actually fatigue you there, yeah. I mean, I get it. Like, it kind of makes sense. It feels weird to play Lexi as a mid-range deck, but the majority of her cards do block 3, right? Like, all of the arrows block 3, so you can play a blocking game if you want to. It's just typically not really efficient to do so. But yeah, in that case, I guess it makes sense. And he obviously knows the matchup extremely well if he manages to win against you on an IP2 penalty, no less.
Yeah, I was incredibly impressed.
Impressive, yeah. But that's actually kind of cool that happened on the last round where it doesn't really matter, right, for the top 8 results. So you can just be like, okay, no pressure, can just enjoy the game and just
enjoy the game. And it was a great game. Yeah, I was really glad to play that.
Yep. No, I can imagine. That sounds pretty good. Yeah, and then I mean the top 8, is mostly on stream. So I think the only game that's missing there is like the rematch against Michael Feng, right?
Yeah.
Which you did win, obviously. So that worked.
Managed to get there second time round. I ended up sideboarding in extra shreds.
Okay.
Because I was like, this guy's blocking.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
And I got fatigued. So I don't sideboard. I don't go crazy. I decided to not play scared. Trust that, I could have won that game. So we'll win this next one. But I just sideboard in like 1 or 2 extra shreds based on his play style.
Right.
And then play the same game plan.
Yep, makes sense. Yeah. So actually, that's actually then really good because that game for you, like the last game of the Swiss, right, was sort of like you could almost say like a scouting match where you can kind of learn, okay, I know this guy doesn't play the absolute typical Lexi game plan, so I need to adjust a little bit what I do. That's a really interesting interaction there. Yeah.
That was a real close game. I think I played very well, aside from missing Tunic twice.
Okay, fair enough, yeah.
Like, I think I blocked and attacked and I did everything right, but I just...
Yeah.
He's an incredible player and he beat me. He's the only Lexi to beat me before, in this tournament.
Yep.
And I mean, it's been a long day, and I miss Tunic.
Totally
I
understand.
know I miss it as soon as I, play or start attacking with something.
Yep.
But
Yeah.
it's too late by then.
Yeah, I mean, at that level, right? Like, even in the Swiss, right? Like, maybe you let it pass and you just go like, yeah, mate, like you've just played one card, just put it there. I don't care. But I think if you make it to top 8, you just, you can't allow those kind of things, right? It's a misplay, and it gives you a marginal advantage that the opponent missed the trigger. You just have to take that. You have to take every advantage that you can get. And it's not about like, being a dick or, anything like that. It's
No,
just
I
about,
mean,
I think Michael Feng's probably, by all accounts, one of the nicest people to play this game from everything that I've heard from everyone who's ever met him. So you just have to be competitive at that stage of the game. There's no way around it. So
yeah. I mean, you want to play, hold your opponent to the level you hold yourself to.
yeah, exactly.
And I mean, that's on me. So,
yep.
We're not begging for a Tunic trigger.
Yeah, no, that's how it goes.
But yeah,
and I mean, you still managed to win, so right, it worked out.
Yeah, towards the end of that game, there's a very quite a fun line that it's a line I like a lot. So we were on, getting down, both walking each other down the life totals.
Mm-hmm.
He's on like 9, 10 maybe, and I have a E-Strike Nimblism in hand. I think his only armor left is a new roll, and he's got a card in Arsenal, so he can't really block with it this turn.
Okay, right.
I decided to tank the damage on his turn in order to keep my hand so that I can attack with dagger, and he makes what I think is the correct play, which is taking the dagger and then dropping to like 8 health or something.
Yeah.
But this is what I expected, because he's thinking, well, Uzuri can't present much about, like if he swings in, I can tank it and play my hand out, and worst case, it's like a shakedown or but I've used up a lot of them at this point.
Right, okay.
But then I get to go the Nimblism into E-Strike for 10.
Yeah.
And now he has to block
because
I'm threatening above lethal. That is Nimblism E-Strike is something that allows you to threaten like a taller attack than usual.
True.
And in that specific situation, because of the way he plays around Spider's Bite, I get to really pressure because, one arrow, so I'm coming in for 10, he's on 8, and one arrow, I'm still presenting lethal.
True.
So he ends up giving me the whole hand to maintain life, because if he's forced to give me 2 cards, then he's going to be easily blocked out by me, and he's low, and then I'm presenting easily lethal the next turn.
So he's basically just playing towards the out of you bricking a bit and not being able to keep up the pressure, right? Which is definitely something that can happen with Uzuri. So heads up play from him, I would say.
But yeah, that was an interesting line. I was pleased with. Ended up paying off for me.
Yep.
My next hand managed to keep up. It wasn't a great hand, but it was in that, it was below rate for 4 cards, but it doesn't need to be above rate for it to still be powerful.
Yeah. In that situation, right, you just need some kind of threat. It doesn't necessarily have to be like, hey, I'm presenting 4 damage per card here. You just need to, string together enough damage that they have to block, and you can keep them locked down. That's all you're looking for in that situation. Yeah.
100%. So we managed to get a really close game. Really love playing that game.
Yeah. All of your top 8 matches, just from what I've seen, like on stream, were incredible. And I think Uzuri kind of, leans herself to that. You're almost never having this like high roll game where you just lock the opponent completely out. It can happen against Lexi specifically sometimes, but Uzuri, just by the nature of how she works, tends to have somewhat close games. That's typically how she works, right? Just as a mid-range deck, right?
She wants your opponent and you to both be on low life.
Yeah.
But she is better at finishing a game than the other deck.
Yeah.
Right? which is, it's one of the reasons I love Shred so much, is like we walk the life totals down, we trade, we do all this back and forth posturing, and at the end of the game, I'm the assassin.
Yep.
And I can get the kill.
You can backstab them and then just kill them, with the shreds. Yeah, makes sense. And that's that's part of why she's so fun to play, because you actually get to play the game for a decent amount of time, right? With all of this back and forth blocking and interaction and stuff. Versus you play like an aggro deck in an aggro mirror, and it's basically like 3 turns or 4 turns of just beating each other's face in and just seeing who drops first, basically, right? And Uzuri is just a little more nuanced than that, I think, in a lot of cases. So definitely great if you're looking for like a more mid-range deck to try out. She's
a lot of fun to play.
Yep. 100%.
I think she's also a very rewarding hero for like fundamentals.
Yep.
Similar to, people might say Bravo's good for teaching you fundamentals, but I think Uzuri more so because, you're going for the wide turns, you're going for the tall turns, you're blocking, sometimes you're pitch stacking, sometimes they're pitch stacking and you're trying to kill them.
Yep.
You're playing with reacts, it's just kind of all of Fab tied together in one fun package. And
I think the part of why she teaches fundamentals so well is because at the core she's a reactive deck, right? Like Uzuri is typically not necessarily the deck that is asking the questions. She's more like presenting answers to the questions, and a lot of Uzuri is knowing what answers to present in which situation. I think that's part of what makes her so strong, is that you can kit her out to do well into almost any deck if you want to. Like you can target wizards, you can target ranger, you can target ninja, you can target guardian. All of these things are possible with Uzuri, but you can't do all of them at once, right? You just don't have the sideboard space for that. So it's always like a little bit, what are you expecting, and then how do you tech around that? And that's what makes her so fun, because she's like this little puzzle of, if you guess right, you get to win, right? Like that's kind of how she operates.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's perfectly said. Is Uzuri is favored versus any deck that she wants to be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You just have to, it's that fun assassin, that merge between flavor and gameplay where if you have a target, you bring the right tools for the job, and they have no chance.
Yep.
But there's a lot of decks to deal with, so you have to make choices. And
you can't deal with all of them at once. That's sadly the reality of it. Yeah.
I chose to, accepted some bad matchups in exchange for being very favored versus the best deck, and felt that I could afford to lose 1 or 2 games into a bad matchup and maybe use that extra reps because people don't know Uzuri too well.
True.
And I'm just really glad that I managed to get there. Really proud that Uzuri's got a major win now. I think she deserves it. She's such a fun hero. You have so much agency, always. If you see a lot of these games that I'm playing, regardless of what role I'm taking in the matchup, I'm always in control of what is occurring in the game.
Yep.
Like in the Dromai matchup, even though it's unfavored, I'm in control of, am I here? Am I here? What direction are we taking? And that is very useful in a game where you have so much time to enact game plans and so many micro decisions.
Uzuri is definitely, like you said, just very good if you like to be in control of the game, I think, right? That's what originally got me onto her, right? Like I used to be a Levia player, and for Levia, while she's a ton of fun to play and she actually also teaches you pretty decent fundamentals, you just have situations where you're not in control of the game, where you literally, in some cases, need to roll the dice, and then depending on what happens, you either have a game or you don't have a game. It's just something that happens. And Levia maybe emphasizes that kind of variance more than most other heroes, but I think to some extent that's something that's inherent to aggro decks, right? Like every aggro deck in this game is going to be higher variance on average than something like a mid-range or control deck, just due to how the deck operates, right? And Uzuri, I think, perfectly hits that sweet spot, that middle ground between I can do both. I can go aggressive, I can go defensive, I have disruption, I have, everything basically in one package. And then, like you said, you can bring tools to deal with any matchup, anything that like is bothersome to you. You can somehow tech for it and make it turn it into a favorite matchup. But you always have to give up percentage points into something else, right? So you don't get to have your lunch and eat it. Basically, you have to choose. And I think that is a really, really good design and really good balance that LSS has achieved with this hero, in my opinion. They've done a really good job of balancing her to a point where she feels good, but she doesn't feel overpowering to the point where you're like, okay, what the hell am I going to do about this? She's just a solid deck. She's never going to be the best deck in any given format, I think, but she's also never going to be a deck that you can completely discount. Like, you always have to keep her in mind, I think, for a pilot that puts in the reps and that knows her and knows the matchups and has a good guess about the meta that's coming. I think she can definitely be an extremely rewarding hero to play and to put the time into.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people don't want to play her because she's too fair.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my, friends who are good players, they're like, I need to play something that's more powerful than Uzuri. But I love it. I love her. And I think, what you're saying about you have to be on the right side of the meta with Uzuri is very, very true. I mean, as I said going into the tournament, I was like, I don't think Dromo's going to come. So I think I'm good. There's going to be a decent number of random rogue decks, like maybe not rogue's the best word, but it's a very wide meta at the moment.
That's true.
Going into this tournament. And I'm like, as long as Dromai isn't at the top of that wide meta, I can handle almost everything else.
Yep.
And that prediction turned out to be true.
Yep.
I only faced one Dromai because a lot of them were in kind of
like the
didn't
lower
get into
brackets,
the higher bracket.
Yep. I think historically that's kind of always been the case for Dromai, right? Like, she's always represented, or at least, in the last, I don't know, half year or so, she's always represented like a fair chunk of the meta, but she always had issues converting well, right? Outside of like a select few really good Dromai pilots like Mara Ferris, that just really put in the reps on the hero and just play her to a level that's like one step above everybody else that's repping the hero, right? But I think Dromai is also one of these decks that's going to have a hard time ever being the best deck in any given format, just because there's too many ways you can tech against her, or rather too many classes or too many other heroes that just kind of counter her game plan to a degree where she just can't adapt to it, right? Like, if Dromai is really good, you just play a whole bunch of ninjas and then she has a hard time dealing with that. That's just the reality of how the class illusionist basically works. So maybe to round this whole thing out, you've already put together a little bit of a, I would say, very tentative post-Lexi kind of worlds list, which I'm also going to link in the description of the video. So this is like what you would run maybe if you were to play Uzuri in a Redline version at Worlds. So obviously this is untested, right? You just threw this together, just, okay, what do I take out once Lexi is gone and what do I put in as a change? So maybe just, quickly give us a rundown. What would you actually switch out?
Yeah. So obviously, most of it's tested and we're just doing a couple of changes. And all of these changes are going to be speculation.
Sure.
No one knows what the spread at Worlds will be. And Uzuri is definitely a hero where there is no right choice. Mm-hmm. There's just a right choice for whatever you're expecting. Mm-hmm. I believe that the Dash IO deck is very powerful and will see a decent number of people taking it, but that may not be right. I mean, it's a very short time period before Worlds, so a lot of people will stick on the deck they're staying on, that they have the reps on, because that's so important in Fab.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's going to be very hard to tell, but I think maybe once the meta kind of settles, we're going to want to cut some number of Frailty Trap. I've gone down to 1.
Yep.
And replace that with another Sigil because Icelander gets a lot better.
Makes sense.
So Sigil to help versus Icelander there. And an extra Fate for Scene because the 0 for 4 opt is probably going to be better in, versus Bravo, versus 5, versus a couple other matchups than the Frailty Trap would with Lexi gone. And then I've swapped Nourishing Emptiness as that sideboard for Dromai, Popper, Tech card to Erase Face, which is game winning versus Mechanologist.
Yep.
Which, if Mechanologist ends up being a powerful deck in the new meta without Lexi, which I think it should in several different versions, because Mechanologist usually is favored versus Wizard. So Icelander, they have the blues, they have those above rate attacks, and they have a lot of good free AB equipment.
Yeah, they can just run AB3 basically without giving up anything. That's really strong, yeah.
So this card is incredibly impactful versus those decks. And, if we think about my game in the finals versus Dash, it was very close. He had some bad draws, and I only just got there.
Yeah.
I think my old version of the list is not favored into that matchup, and it's a very tough battle. However, once we tech away from Lexi and tech to something like that, because our deck's still good into Fi, still good into any kind of aggressive strategy as a baseline, this stops their whole turn.
Yep.
And when you're playing it off an isolate, they're probably going to declare no blocks, keep that 5-card hand, and then they can't use it. Like, one free turn is enough to win a game.
Yep.
So I think this is a good pick going into Worlds, and you still get to use it versus Icelander.
Yep.
To turn off Fuse on their turn, which is very relevant sometimes. And if it lines up with their good ice turn, then suddenly you just take the Arcane and you present damage back again.
Yep. They don't get to disrupt you in any way. It's just like, okay, Ether Ice Vein hits for like 5 Arcane. Okay, carry on.
Yeah.
I don't care.
At that
point.
If they play out an Insidious Chill, and then you get to hit them with this, and it just suddenly you're not falling behind, and you get to keep that pressure on.
Yep.
So I think this leaves the deck still with a solid game plan into Dromai, good number of poppers, good number of go again, and I think it should be able to be very favored.
Yep, that makes sense. Yeah. So you mentioned earlier when we were talking, like outside of the video, that you would not recommend somebody to bring Uzuri to Worlds. Is that just because she's generally stronger into a meta that's like, I would say, figured out in a way? I mean, we're never gonna have a completely figured out meta, but if you know like the general matchup spread, what the top deck is and everything, obviously Uzuri gets a bit stronger because, like I said, she's a reactive deck, right? She wants to be able to adapt to a meta to bring the correct tools for everything. So obviously the World's meta with Lexi just having rotated, Bright Lights being like a month old at this point and not really 100% figured out. Obviously the World's meta is kind of, unknown. Like you said, we don't really know what's going to be played there. We don't really know what the best deck in the format is at the moment. That spot has been vacated and we just have no clue what it's going to be. Is it going to be like an aggro deck? Is it going to be a Fi maybe? Is it going to be Dash.io? Is it maybe going to be Icelander again? Who knows? Is it maybe going to be Dromai? Like, there's a couple of options, and until Worlds, we just won't really know. So that like uncertainty obviously makes it a little harder to accurately predict and tech for a specific meta with Uzuri. Is that why you think that maybe she's not the best pick at Worlds?
I think if you already are good Uzuri pilot, then I wouldn't swap off if you've been working towards it. Swapping off is, I think, usually a wrong call because of how important matchup knowledge is.
I mean, like 1 week before the event, yeah, definitely. I would do that, yeah.
I think Uzuri loses a incredibly favored matchup and a large reason to play the deck, right? Uzuri kind of needs to be favored versus the best deck, right? Because her job is to decide what the best deck is, what the most played deck is, and just tech so that it's easy.
Counter that, yeah.
That said, if you think you have, your finger on the pulse of Worlds, if you do know what's going to happen, if you've got the good call, it's a risk, but I mean, you can't win the whole World Championship without a bit of luck. I think Uzuri is a very good pick because you have a solid game plan into kind of rogue decks, random things, while still being able to tech very heavily for if you decide this is the matchups we care about. It's really, you said it's very reactive deck. It's incredibly reactive in deck building.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
But it's a very proactive deck whilst playing.
Yeah.
Which is quite unique in the game because, you have Oldham, who is a very reactive deck in deck building, has all the answers, and it's the same when you play.
Yeah, true.
And you have the proactive decks, Phi, Lexi, but they're proactive in the deck building phase as well.
True.
I think Uzuri gets the best of both worlds where you get to play a reactive deck build style, which is, I think, what you want as a deck builder, is to be able to bring the right tools for the job. And then you get to sit down at the tournament and play proactively. You're in control of the game. You're making threats.
Yeah.
And it brings those two together.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think this is probably what I take to Worlds, maybe a couple ratios here and there. But I think Erase Face does turn the Mechanologist matchup into about as favored as Lexi was. I mean, Dash.io cannot do anything.
Yeah,
really.
Erase Face just shuts her down, basically. She can't.
And you only need
boost.
one extra disruption tool. You hit them with a shakedown, you hit them with 1M, you attack in with an E-strike. Their life total is going to go down very.
Yeah. True. And I mean, it does have marginal utility into other heroes, right? It's not like Erase Face is a dead card in other matchups. Like, it's okay.
It's still good versus Phi.
It's good versus Phi, exactly. Like, not being Draconic does turn off a couple of his synergies. Like, he's going to have trouble stringing together a couple of turns if he doesn't have a Draconic card to start it. Because if they're an Ember Blade, which I think is the correct call into Uzuri a lot of the time, Erase Face turns that off, basically. Can't use his flames efficiently, all of that stuff. So it's a good card there. Like you said, it's good against Icelander, but obviously against Mech is where it really, really shines. Like, I think the only Mechanologist that doesn't care about this is Tekla-Vossen. And the chance of actually encountering a Tekla-Vossen at a high-level competitive event is, like, very low, I would say.
Yeah.
And all of the others, whether it's Max or either flavor of Dash, if they get hit by Erase Face, they just don't have a turn. So
yeah. So I think Uzuri will be a reasonable choice. Losing Lexi matchup, it just hurts the soul. I love playing versus Lexi. People complain about Lexi's OP or what do you do? They just play Rain Razors. And to that I say, well, you should have just played Uzuri.
Yeah.
This meta is so much fun.
Yeah. It's true. Like, we're basically the only deck that just is happy to see a Lexi. Like, every other deck, when they were facing a Lexi, is like, oh god, it's another Lexi. I have to deal with this now. And as a Uzuri, you're just like, hey, Lexi, great. I love this. This is why I came here. This is why I play this deck. And you're sad if you don't get paired into a ton of Lexi. Like, that's how the reality of a tournament with Uzuri actually was. Yeah.
But I think it's so hard to say what a good deck for Worlds will be. Because even if you decide that, Icelander is the best deck, I've done the maths, I've done all the testing, this deck is cracked into everything.
Yeah.
Well, you get to play it, sure. But if you're building, if you are on a deck that you're teching for against other decks, it doesn't matter if Max Nitro is actually the best deck in the format if only one player plays it.
True. Makes sense.
So you also just need to know what is the raw numbers going to be.
Yep.
But yeah, I think Uzuri is good into a wide meta. And I mean, looking at the list, thinking about it, I'm tempted to buy tickets. Race Face, it's looking pretty good.
It's a good card. Like, yep. Erase Face stonks definitely going up. Buy your copies today before they're sold out and we get another price spike. Actually, I think I only have 2 of them. I should probably grab a 3rd copy while I'm at it. Yeah. Also, that card probably looks sick in rainbow foil.
Oh,
Just
the art is beautiful.
looking at the art right now, that card is probably a sick foil. You can just kind of tell, like sometimes you can tell with cards, you see the regular artwork and you're like, yeah, this is going to be a sick foil. You get those cards sometimes. All right. Okay. I think that should wrap it up. We've managed to talk a lot about Uzuri. To anyone still watching, thanks for sticking with us. To you, Ben, thank you for coming on the channel and sharing your success story with Uzuri. Again, man, congrats for getting the calling win. I love to see that. And yeah, it was awesome. What a journey, man. Really, from like starting the Redline build and then getting the calling win with the Redline build. It was just, really nice to watch all of that. So yeah, as always, if you have any questions about the deck, about anything, leave them down in the comments below. You can find both of us on the FabTCG Discord in the Uzuri channel. If you've got any questions to ask, feel free to fire them out there. And if you're repping Uzuri in any capacity, be it at an armory with a couple of friends, be it at a competitive level event, if you're bringing Uzuri to Worlds, hey, let me know, hit me up. If you do, there's a video in it for you. And yeah, with that, thank you guys for watching and see you in the next one.